most recent Seekers of the Storm update changed a few of the items in the DLC, mostly nerfs, but some buffs for certain items. You can check out my patch videos to see most of the changes. In my previous tier list video if you want to see what all the items do, with their original rankings, but this is going to be a shorter ranking video for these items, since not all of them got changed. For starters, here's what the previous list looked like. The items that changed are as follows: Long-Standing Solitude, Elusive Antlers, Growth Nectar, Warped Echo, War Bonds, Breaching Fin, Bolstering Lantern, Sonorous Whispers, and Chronic Expansion. I'll be ranking these changes from worst to best, and then at the very end add them back into the tier list. And to clarify, by worst I mean the largest nerf to the item. Starting out with Chronic Expansion, they nerfed the beep. Now what am I supposed to use as my alarm clock in the morning? Unstable Transmitter, going from one of the strongest items in the game, undoubtedly the strongest defensive item, to instead being an okay defensive item. My Abuse This While You Can video explains why this item was so broken, but essentially you had one-shot protection as long as this was off cooldown beforehand. Now it can only be activated once per stage, barrier gain has been reduced to 35%, down from 75%, and the one-shot protection has been removed. It will still protect your watches and elixir, unlike the original version did when it first released, and instead of stacking with cooldown, it works more like a regenerating scrap where it regenerates after every stage, and you get +1 uses per stack, so it's not a terrible item by any means, but now I just don't easily pick it up. Elusive Antlers, Rip BOZO, Pack Watch. You get what you deserve. Antler Shield sends its regards. The base move speed benefit of Elusive Antlers has been completely removed, and now you can only gain the movement speed by collecting the orbs itself. Whereas before it would give you a passive 7%, so at just one stack you would get 43% bonus move speed. Now you only get 36% as long as you're picking up the orbs. Oh boo-hoo, did someone get addicted to broken movement speed items? Oh, I actually have to work for my movement speed. Bolstering Lantern. Its attack speed bonus has been reduced from 10% to 7.5% per enemy or ally within 20 meters. This means on the first stack of Bolstering Lantern, you have 2 soldier syringes worth of attack speed, granted you have the full buff. And each extra stack actually only adds 1 soldier syringe worth. This is quite the hefty nerf for this item, considering it's situationally dependent. And even though the radius does increase with each stack, due to math, the radius doesn't increase that much with each stack. I mean, it takes 114 stacks before you can reach the distance that Dr. Disrespect has to live away from a school. That being said, I don't think the nerf is that bad. You have to remember that allies count, so your turrets if you're on Engineer, your drones, Beetle Guard, Solus Probe units, and of course if you manage to have any, friends, they also count. And on top of this adds a buff which benefits Growth Nectar, which happens to be the next item that got nerfed. Growth Nectar now grants 4% increase to all stats, down from the 7% of each buff, up to a maximum of 4 + 4 per stack. In other words, the only thing that changed is that you don't increase your stats per stack, and the starting amount was decreased. The first stack now only gives you 16% instead of 28%. This item was giga-busted before because the stacking was kind of exponential, and during some of my Benthic Bloom runs, the stat increase would have me Scooby-Doo running, because even acceleration was affected by it or something. Now instead of being one of the de facto best red items in the game, and hands down the best item to stack, it's now just a solid red item that you might get 1 or 2 stacks of, but past that you don't get much benefit. Of course situationally, because Wake of Vultures also makes this item even better, and certain survivors have buffs in their kit. Speaking of nerfed red items, we have War Bonds. War Bonds no longer has a proc coefficient, meaning it can't proc ATGs and one-shot bosses. I know, such a travesty. You're actually gonna have to get your hands dirty and kill a teleporter boss yourself this time. Also, it's slightly harder to get missiles now. Each additional missile will now cost a large chest worth of gold instead of a small chest. So inflation is even hitting Petrichor. More like Petrichor, am I right? Base damage increase of Breaching Fin reduced to 10% from 20%. However, each juggle increases damage by 10%, and stacking it not only gives you another juggle, but also increases the damage of each juggle. In other words, Breaching Fin is now half as good as it used to be with 1 stack, the same amount of damage bonus with 2 stacks, and past that, the new Breaching Fin is actually better. Obviously, it's an uncommon item, so it's not going to be often where you find yourself in a situation where this is a buff, but hey, it's a cool change at least. Sonorous Whispers got changed slightly. The loot chance has been rebalanced so that white items appear more often. I explained this in the original patch notes video, but there's something called drop chance bias, which means essentially that the more items a certain rarity has, the more often that's going to pop up, and because there's more green items in the game than there are white items, that causes green items to pop up more than they should. Not the biggest deal, but it's still a nerf. Long-Standing Solitude had its gold to XP ratio rebalanced, whatever that means. Since they don't really provide you with any numbers, I gotta go off of anecdotes here. And for the most part, Long-Standing Solitude feels the same, but people have said it takes a little bit longer to get to the later levels than it did before. So hitting max level with Long-Standing Solitude might be harder, which in turn makes me less so. But as I've played with it, and by it I mean my Long-Standing Solitude, it hasn't really changed much for me. Finally, we have Warped Echo, which just got a straight up buff. The first hit damage reduction got lowered to 20% from 30%, but the delayed damage ticks can now be affected by things like Repulsion Armor, Planula, Razor Wire, Roll of Pennies, etc. Tougher times, putting Warped Echo towards the top of all defensive items in the game. Previously, the only thing that really worked with it was Razor Wire, and Repulsion Armor and Planula would only work on the first hit. Now, not only do those items help, but you can also give your tougher times more opportunity to help block all the lethal damage you were about to take. It's not technically broken because you need a lot of stacks of Warped Echo for this really to make any difference. And you're also going to need some of the other items as well, a Planula, Repulsion Armor, tougher times before this even becomes a factor. But it is a massive buff for an item that people thought was going to work with Repulsion Armor and Planula in the first place, and adds item synergies, which is something I'm all about, just like Dr. Disrespect in. Okay, and I promised that I would put all of this back in a tier list again. So based off of my very limited knowledge of playing on this patch so far, this is how I would place everything now. Some things like Longstanding Solitude, Sail Star, and Sonorous Whispers haven't changed, and some of these items might even be able to get knocked down to B tier. But since there's still one more phase left in the roadmap, I'm not even going to waste my time trying to rank these items yet. For all I know, a week later, I'm going to have to make another one of these. Swag Money 69 signing out.